I got fired 27 minutes after preventing a statewide energy collapse. No warning. No thank you. No handshake. Just a pre-printed termination letter handed to me across a cold glass table. The night before, I was rerouting energy nodes, manually fighting through 4 firewall breaches string to keep the Illinois grid from going dark. I hadn't slept in 32 hours. My hair was still damp from the rain when I walked into the office the next morning, thinking maybe just maybe I'd finally earned a seat at that executive table. Instead, Evan Mercer, the same man who once told me I was the heart of this company, looked me in the eye and said, "Effective immediately, your position has been dissolved." No explanation. Just dissolved. I stared at the letter, still stained with a drop of rain from my sleeve. Right there, under my name, it read, Solenta Energy retains full rights to all intellectual property developed by employee Riley Madsen during her tenure. That meant my code, my design, the entire energy mesh system I'd spent 11 years building. Gone. Like I'd never existed. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just walked out. But inside, something snapped. Not with rage, something sharper. Colder. Focused. Because when you give up a decade of your life for something you believe in, sacrifice, birthdays, relationships, even your father's funeral, and they still erase you, you don't scream. You remember. You remember the files you encrypted, the clauses you wrote, the name of the LLC you incorporated 3 years ago just in case they ever tried this. And in that moment, sitting alone in my car in the underground garage, clutching the USB backup I never let out of my sight, I made a silent decision. If they thought erasing me would be easy, they forgot who built the system they're standing on. If you've ever been erased from something you helped build just because you didn't fit someone else's narrative, drop a comment below that says, "I know that feeling." You're not alone. Because this isn't where the story ends. This is where it begins. They never saw me. Not in the boardrooms, not in the company newsletters, not even in the photo walls they put up for Employee Appreciation Month. And yet I was always there. I joined Solenta Energy when I was 23. Just a fresh graduate from Stanford with student loans and a thesis on decentralized grid systems that no one read. But Evan Mercer did. Back then, he wasn't CEO. Just another junior strategist, sitting across from me in cramped conference rooms and nodding along while I explained how adaptive nodes could revolutionize renewable power delivery. He said, "You think in layers." I said, "That's because I've never had the luxury of thinking in straight lines." He laughed. I thought that meant respect. For the next 11 years, I stayed late, came in early, ran diagnostics at 2 a.m. I built the e-mesh from scratch, Solenta's energy mesh infrastructure that now powers over a third of the Midwest. And I did it quietly. I wasn't trying to be invisible. I just didn't know how to ask for credit without sounding arrogant. Besides, the work mattered more. At least. That's what I kept telling myself. I remember once, 5 years in, I got invited to speak at a small tech conference in Seattle. Nothing fancy. Just 20 minutes on stage with a Q&A at the end. I was excited, nervous, but proud. The morning I left, I found a memo slipped under my door. Internal travel requires executive approval. You're not cleared. I canceled the flight, didn't ask why. That's when I started realizing I wasn't being overlooked. I was being contained. Still, I stayed. Through company reorgs, leadership changes, budget cuts. I was there when a winter storm almost took down 3 power grids simultaneously. I rerouted the entire load manually in under 90 minutes. No press release. Just a quiet thank you from an intern who watched me do it. And I didn't even mind. Because in some strange way, I believed in the mission. Clean energy. Smarter systems. Infrastructure that served people, not just profit. But what no one saw, what no one ever asked, was what I gave up to make it all happen. My dad passed away from heart failure 6 years ago. He'd been sick for a while, and I kept promising I'd fly home for a weekend. Just one. I missed his last phone call because I was troubleshooting a bug that turned out to be a corrupted log file. My boyfriend Logan left a year later. Said he couldn't keep competing with a company that didn't even know my birthday. I didn't argue. I just said, I need to finish this deployment first. That deployment turned into another, and another, and another. Until suddenly, I looked up, and 11 years had passed. 11 years of silence. Of sitting in meetings where my designs were shown, but my name was not. Of watching newer, louder voices get promoted for saying ideas I had quietly implemented months before. And still I stayed. Because part of me believed that if I just worked a little harder, kept my head down a little longer, someday they'd turn around and finally say, "You were the one who built this." But they never did. And the silence stopped feeling like strategy. It started feeling like surrender. It didn't happen all at once. That's how it always starts, isn't it? Not with a headline, not with a confrontation, just small shifts. Doors that used to be open, suddenly staying closed. Memos that never make it to your inbox. Meetings rescheduled without notice, and then somehow you're not on the invite list at all. The first red flag showed up in a folder. Every week, I submitted system efficiency reports directly to the internal shared drive labeled, time-stamped, color-coded. For nearly a decade, they were reviewed like clockwork. Comments, follow-ups, sometimes even praise from a director or two. Then, one week, nothing. No one opened it. The next week, same thing. By the third week, I added a test. I inserted a deliberate error into the report. A misaligned node placement. If anyone was reading, they'd catch it immediately. It stayed there for 10 days before I went in and fixed it myself. That's when I knew. The second red flag came from the break room. Evan was in there with 2 board members. They stopped talking when I walked in. Not just paused, stopped like a movie that had been playing and someone hit mute. He smiled and nodded. "Hey, Riley." I nodded back, poured my coffee, and walked out. But I could feel it, the shift in energy. That invisible line that says you're no longer inside the circle. After that, I started noticing who was being included. Jenna from analytics, great with numbers but barely familiar with system architecture, suddenly became the face of grid innovation. Her name showed up in press briefs. She started attending vendor calls I used to lead. When I asked her about it, she said, "Oh, Evan said it was just a bandwidth thing, didn't want to overload you." I didn't argue. But something in me tightened. The third red flag came from a guy named Matt. He was a senior systems engineer, quiet, reliable, the kind of guy who could trace a thermal cascade blindfolded. One morning, I passed by his desk, and his monitors were off. That never happened. By lunch, his name had disappeared from the employee directory. No announcement, no email, just gone. Later that week, I found him sitting alone outside the building with a box of his things. I sat down beside him. He didn't look at me, just said, "Watch your back, Riley. You're next." So I asked, "Why?" He exhaled slowly. "Because you still think you're safe." That one stuck with me. It's easy to miss the signs when you've trained yourself to focus only on the work. When you believe that being excellent is enough protection. That loyalty buys security. That if you keep your head down, the storm will pass you. But storms don't pass people who built the foundation. They target them. So I paid attention. I stopped assuming. Every hallway glance, every polite smile, every "will circle back," I filed it away. I started watching the system as if I weren't part of it anymore. And the more I watched, the more I realized I was being edged out. Quietly, deliberately, strategically. They weren't going to confront me. They were just going to erase me. The thing about being ignored for long enough is that you learn how to move without being seen. And that became my advantage. The same silence they used to push me aside, I used it to build something they'd never expect. Something quiet. Something legal. Something airtight. 3 years before the first red flag, I created a shell company in Delaware. Matson Vector LLC. On paper, It looked like a consultancy generic, faceless, just another name in the corporate sea. But behind that LLC was a full intellectual property framework tied to me. I wasn't trying to deceive anyone. I was trying to protect something that mattered. The eMesh architecture wasn't just a system. It was my life's work. My signature was buried in every line of code, every adaptive loop, every fail-safe module. I just stopped assuming the company would honor that forever. So while they praised my prototypes in private and shelved my credit in public, I registered every iteration of the core system with the U.S. Copyright Office under Madsen Vector. I documented development logs, timestamps, architecture drafts, physical copies, and encrypted backups. I had everything notarized through a third-party compliance agent. No noise. No bragging. Just structure. And here's where it gets smarter. The version of the eMesh that Solenta implemented? It wasn't the full one. They thought it was. Of course they did. It worked beautifully. But the version I integrated into their system was a streamlined shell functional, but dependent. Like a brilliant engine. Missing one key chip. That chip, the core authentication layer, lived outside their control. Without it, the system would operate fine. For a while. Long enough to pass inspections. Long enough to impress investors. But not long enough to survive scale. They didn't know that. And they never asked. Because people like Evan, they assume ownership by proximity. If it's in their building, on their servers, running under their brand, it must be theirs. But ownership isn't about location. It's about authorship. And I'd made sure mine was undeniable. I also embedded a licensing protocol directly into the backend, silent, invisible, and legally binding. If my name was ever removed as the original architect without legal grounds, the protocol would activate a breach class zone that could revoke their access immediately. I remember writing that line of code at 2:13 a.m. in my apartment, sipping cold coffee with a heating pad wrapped around my back. I whispered aloud as I typed it. If they ever try to erase me, let this be the fingerprint they can't wipe. And I meant it. I didn't know when or even if they'd cross that line. But I wasn't going to wait and hope they wouldn't. Hope is a beautiful thing. But structure is what saves you when hope runs out. It started with one email. A small solar infrastructure company in Oregon, family-owned, modest in scale, reached out through the contact form on the Madsen Vector website. The message was simple. We've heard whispers about a modular energy mesh system that's not tied to the big three. Is that you? I stared at the message for a long time before replying. It was me. But I didn't want to offer them a product. I wanted to offer them freedom from the overbuilt, overpriced, over-controlled ecosystems that held companies hostage under the guise of innovation. So I sent them a custom license. Clean, fair, transparent. They signed within 48 hours. From there, it spread. Not fast, but steadily. Quietly. The way good things tend to when they're built on trust. In less than 8 months, I had partnered with 36 companies across North America. Wind farms in Colorado. Smart home energy co-ops in Vermont. Microgrid startups in Nevada. Even a data center outside Toronto that needed dynamic load balancing to support a growing AI cluster. Each one signed the same agreement. Use the system freely. Do not modify the core without clearance. And, under no circumstances, remove the original architect's name from the documentation. It wasn't about ego. It was about integrity. I wasn't trying to get rich. I was building something I wished had existed for mean infrastructure model that didn't reward exploitation, but enabled resilience. Every time a company signed, I added their credentials to the private dashboard I'd built inside Madsen Vector. Rows and rows of license IDs, contract dates, clause indicators. All green. All verified. And Solenta? They were just another client in the list. License ID MV, 019. Internal demo partner. Limited rights. Renewable term, 6 months. All 11. They never asked about it. Never even noticed. Because they didn't care to. Evan and his team assumed I'd handed over the final product out of loyalty or desperation, or both. They didn't think to question why the integration code needed outside authentication, or why the documentation had minor inconsistencies just enough to seem like version drift. Because arrogance blinds people more effectively than any algorithm I've ever written. And while they were planning marketing campaigns and investor decks, I was fortifying the foundation. The Madsen Vector CodeMe code was now powering backup grids in Montana, controlling adaptive street lighting in Seattle, and balancing energy loads in a hospital system in rural Iowa. None of them knew my face, but every single one knew my signature. It was in the way their systems stayed stable under pressure. In the way outages resolved themselves without human interference. In the way the documentation actually made sense. I didn't need applause. I just needed confirmation that the work worked. So, while Solenta kept pushing me further from the table, I had already built one of my own. No one at Solenta knew what I was doing. Not because I was hiding it, but because they were too busy pretending I wasn't worth watching. And honestly, that was their biggest mistake. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The kind of afternoon that felt like any other half-drunk coffee on my desk, dashboard logs scrolling lazily across the monitor, and the quiet hum of a server fan behind me. Then an email arrived. Subject line: just saw something you might want to look at. It was from Logan. We hadn't spoken in over 2 years, not since the day he walked out with his duffel bag and said, "I can't compete with a company that doesn't even remember your birthday." There'd been no texts, no birthdays, no check-ins. So when I saw his name, my heart hesitated. The body of the email was just one sentence. Check the SEC pre-filing database. Solenta's S1 just dropped. And below that one attachment, a clipped PDF labeled Solenta Draft IPO Summary. PDF. I opened it slowly, already bracing for something. I didn't know what, exactly, until I hit page 4. There it was. In bold font. Our proprietary adaptive mesh platform mesh serves as the core of Solenta's infrastructure strategy moving forward. The wording stopped me. Proprietary. Platform. Core. No footnote. No mention of contributors. No credit to the architect. My name was nowhere on the document. They'd filed their IPO on the back of my system. And not just the version I deployed in demo environments. The summary outlined features and modules that only existed in the full framework, the one registered under Madsen Vector. The one I never gave them. My hands froze on the keyboard. I didn't panic. I didn't scream. I just felt a very specific kind of cold rise through my body. Like an elevator descending to the wrong floor. I scrolled further. The executive summary stated confidently, Solenta holds full ownership of the underlying technology, including intellectual property rights and associated architecture. And that's when it stopped being a misunderstanding. This was theft. Quiet, polished, institutional. The kind of theft that comes dressed in investor confidence and market projections. I called Logan. He picked up on the first ring. "Hey," he said, cautious. "I wasn't sure if I should send that." You did the right thing," I replied, my voice steady but low. He paused. "They didn't list you anywhere. Not in the engineering appendix. Not in the founder history. Nothing." "I know." He hesitated again. "Riley, I remember how much you gave to them." "So do I." There was a beat of silence between us. Not awkward, just full. Heavy. Then he added, "You built their foundation. They're calling it theirs." I nodded to myself. Not for long. He didn't ask questions. Didn't offer advice. Just said, "If you need a voice, I've got press access now. Say the word." We ended the call. No promises. No apologies. Just quiet understanding. I stared at the IPO summary on my screen. The company I had helped build was about to go public on a foundation they didn't own. They thought I was gone. That I wouldn't notice. That I wouldn't fight. And honestly, that used to be true. But not anymore. If you discovered that something you built, something you poured your soul into, was being used to make someone else rich while you were erased from the story, what would you do? Let me know in the comments below. I want to hear your truth. Because this was no longer just business. It was personal. And I still had the original blueprint. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. The IPO filing kept looping through my mind, line by line, like a betrayal written in corporate language. Every word carefully chosen to bury mine. Every sentence, a paper-cut version of theft. But I didn't panic. I planned. Because long before this moment, long before Evan became CEO, long before they stopped reading my reports, I had written one line of code that wasn't part of any system diagram. It lived deep in the back end, hidden inside a conditional logic chain. It wasn't just code. It was Clause 17.3c. A quiet, contractual time bomb. Back when I started Madsen Vector, I didn't know how things would unfold. I didn't have a master plan. I wasn't trying to be clever or paranoid. I was just tired of watching talented people get steamrolled, credited last, or erased entirely. So I wrote a clause into every license agreement. One line. If the original author is removed without legal basis or credited falsely in external filings, all active licenses will revert to the author's sole control. No delay, no appeal. I remember sitting at my kitchen counter in the dark, coffee gone cold, typing it slowly with fingers that half shook. At the time, it felt like an overreaction. Now it felt prophetic. I logged into the Madsen Vector dashboard. 36 license IDs lined the screen. All green, all active, all valid. Except one. License ID MV-019. Solenta Energy. Status. Review triggered. The system had already flagged the violation based on keywords in the IPO document. The moment they claimed proprietary ownership in the SEC filing, the trigger activated. I didn't even have to do it manually. I clicked into the log. There it was. Clause breach recorded. Timestamped. Violation. Authorship removal and unauthorized IP claim. Recommended action. Full revocation. I hovered my mouse over the Initiate Review button. But I didn't click. Not yet. Because revoking the license wouldn't just pull Solenta's plug, it would ripple across their clients, partners, vendors, even regional infrastructure, contracts tied to their system. People could lose jobs, grids could destabilize. There would be headlines, lawsuits, damage. And I wasn't built to hurt people. That was never the point. But staying silent wasn't an option either. Not anymore. So I did what I always do when I don't trust my emotions. I gathered evidence. I reopened the folder labeled Failsafe. Inside were copies of every signed license agreement, all notarized with full clause visibility. I pulled metadata logs showing original authorship, timestamps, commits, and third-party verification from the day Madsen Vector was registered. Then I opened one last document, a scanned NDA from Solenta's legal archives, signed by Evan himself, dated June 2019. It confirmed, in his own words, that I was the original creator of the eMesh infrastructure model and that Solenta would act only as an implementation partner. He'd forgotten it existed. But I hadn't. And suddenly, everything clicked into place. I wasn't bluffing. I wasn't lashing out. I was enforcing what I'd always built, a system that protects its creator when everyone else forgets her name. I closed the folder, took a breath, and whispered to no one in particular. You can erase a name from a document, but you can't erase the code that still answers to her. It didn't feel like revenge. Not in the way people expect. There was no smirk, no fist pump, no dramatic music in the background. Just the soft hum of my laptop, the glow of the dashboard, and the steady rhythm of my breathing. I had everything I needed. License agreements. Metadata logs. That signed NDA with Evan's initials still looping at the bottom like a forgotten signature on a death warrant. And now, I had a choice. On my screen, the revocation command was ready. All I had to do was click. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I was unsure, but because I understood what came next. The moment I initiated it, Solenta's access to the e-mesh would collapse. Their dashboards would lock out. Every adaptive node would revert to base protocol. Load balancing would freeze. Automation would fail. I'd built this thing to protect entire cities. And now I was about to pull the plug. Not because I wanted to watch them fall, but because they built everything on a stolen core and pretended it was theirs. I clicked. The screen shifted. A final confirmation. Are you sure you want to revoke license MOL-019? This action is irreversible. I hovered for just one more second. Then I whispered to myself, this isn't destruction. It's correction. And I pressed confirm. The dashboard flickered. License ID MV-019 revoked. In the control panel, logs streamed in real time. One by one, systems flagged errors. Then cascading failures. Then complete shutdown. Across town, in Solenta's central operations hub, I imagined the alarms going off. I imagined engineers scrambling to troubleshoot systems they didn't understand, systems they thought they owned. And at the center of it all, Evan Frotzen. Not because a hacker had breached his empire, but because the person he'd erased had just taken back her name. I flipped over to a secondary screen I'd configured years ago for diagnostics. It's still linked to the cloud-based server logs I'd helped build during my time at Solenta. I shouldn't have had access anymore. But, like I said, they never thought I was worth watching. The logs showed system-wide lockouts. Automated backups failing to authenticate. Even the climate control in their smart building had reverted to factory mode. I could almost see them sweating in real time. And then, as if on cue, the emails started coming in. Vendors, partners, regional grid coordinators. Subject lines all the same. System failure. Access denied. What's going on? They had no idea. But they would soon. Because this wasn't just a glitch. This was consequence. The result of years of silencing, sidelining, and stealing from someone who built in silence but documented everything. And here's the thing. I wasn't trying to break Solenta. I was trying to remind them. If you build your empire on the back of someone else's brilliance, you better be damn sure she's not still holding the foundation. I didn't open the news right away. I didn't refresh Twitter. I didn't check trending tags. I didn't call anyone. I just made coffee. The apartment was quiet, the way it always was in the early hours. Sunlight barely pushing through the blinds, the sound of the kettle building pressure. My cat curled on the windowsill, unconcerned. But I could feel it. Something had shifted. By the time I opened my laptop, my inbox was already flooded. Subject lines stacked on top of each other like falling dominoes. Urgent. Licensing breach? Systems down. Please advise. Solenta IPO suspended. Need statement. Oh, then one from the SEC. We've temporarily halted the IPO of Solenta Energy pending investigation of intellectual property discrepancies. No apology, no outrage. Just process. The way institutions move when someone finally flips the right switch. On my screen, the Madsen Vector dashboard glowed calmly. Every license but one green, intact, operational. Solenta's? Still red. Still revoked. And then came the press. Within hours, headlines began to ripple outward. Solenta systems crippled by licensing collapse. IPO halted amid claims of stolen infrastructure. Anonymous inventor may hold key to company's future. I wasn't anonymous. Not anymore. I didn't call journalists. I didn't post a thread. I just sent one message to a single outlet, The Circuit, a quiet but respected publication I'd followed for years. The email had no subject. Just one sentence in the body. I didn't break it. I just stopped holding it up. They ran that as the headline. Later that afternoon, someone forwarded me a clip from a Solenta press briefing. Evan stood behind a podium, jaw tight, sleeves rolled, trying to maintain control of a room that had already slipped through his fingers. sweat visible on his collar. He cleared his throat. This was an internal misunderstanding. We're working to clarify legacy licensing terms. A reporter interrupted. Did Solenta file an IPO based on code it didn't legally own? Another voice. Were you aware of the original author's license clause? Evan's mouth opened, but no words came out. The feed cut shortly after that. I didn't watch it again. Instead, I turned my attention to the emails that mattered. Not the ones from lawyers or executives. The ones from engineers, grid operators, system coordinators, people who had depended on the eMesh to keep their communities running. We always wondered who built it. Thank you for holding the line. If you offer reinstatement, we'd like to continue under your terms. Not one blamed me. They understood. Because this wasn't sabotage. It was structure. This was what happens when someone builds with care, when someone thinks beyond the immediate win, and prepares for the moment when the truth would matter most. Solenta had PR statements. I had receipts. They had investors. I had proof. They had noise. I had code. And when the noise quieted, when the dust started to settle, the industry didn't ask, who took them down? They asked, who built the thing in the first place? And this time, they knew the answer. The offer came 3 days after the shutdown. It didn't come with fanfare. No golden envelope. No dramatic phone call. Just a quiet message in my encrypted inbox, marked high priority. Sender, Amira Khalid. Position, VP of Strategic Acquisitions. Virion Technologies. Subject, exclusive proposal. Full acquisition rights. The message was brief, polite, impeccably worded. Miss Madsen, we've followed your recent work with great admiration. Virion is prepared to acquire the full proprietary rights to the Madsen Vector eMesh framework exclusive, irrevocable, immediate. Then came the number, $4.2 billion. All cash. Cleared. Within 7 business days. You walk away. We take it global. I sat back in my chair. It wasn't the number that stunned me. It was the tone calm, clinical, like they were purchasing a property, a factory, a mineral field. Not an idea. Not a life's work. They weren't the first to approach me, but they were the biggest. And for a moment, just a moment, I let my mind wander. 4.2 billion. That's generational wealth. That's silence bought and paid for. That's never having to explain yourself again. I imagined the freedom of it. No more emails. No more pressure. No more being the person holding up the structure while others fight over the spotlight. But then I thought of something else. I thought of the single mother who emailed me after the shutdown to say her town's hospital stayed online during a storm because of my system. I thought of the intern in Vermont who sent me screenshots of his modified node config, writing, I hope I did it justice. Oh, I thought of my father, who once said, the point of building something isn't to sell it, it's to make sure it keeps standing after you're gone. And I realized, I didn't build Madsen Vector to cash out. I built it because no one else would protect the builders. Because no one had protected me. I opened a blank reply and typed, thank you for your interest. I respectfully decline. This system was not designed to be owned. It was designed to be earned. End quote. I hit send before I could second guess myself. An hour later, another email arrived from Evan. No subject line. Just 3 words in the body. We can match. I didn't respond. Because here's the truth they still didn't understand. I never fought for money. I fought for agency. For credit. For control. For the right to say, this was mine. And I decided what came next. You don't get to erase a person and then buy your way back into their story. You don't get to own a vision just because you finally noticed it was valuable. That night, I walked through my city head down, hoodie up, just another shadow moving through the streetlights. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt untouchable, because every empire that had tried to contain me was now waiting for me to reply. And I'd already made my decision. The first message came from a wind cooperative in Montana. Just one line. We'd like to renew under your name this time. Then another. A solar infrastructure startup in New Mexico. We never knew who built the backbone of our system. Now that we do, we'd like to make that right. One by one, they arrived. Grid by grid. Company by company. Engineers, directors, operations, leads, people who had depended on the system I built without ever knowing who designed it. They weren't asking for discounts. They weren't asking for access. They were asking for recognition, and they were offering it first. Not just through reinstated licenses, but through words. Through signatures, through change. A public forum was created by a group of CTOs dedicated to open-source architecture integrity. One post had my name in the title. We credit Riley Madsen not just as the original architect of the e-mesh system, but as the one who reminded us that attribution isn't a favor, it's a foundation. I read it twice. Then again. And still, a part of me didn't fully believe it. Because when you've been invisible for long enough, being seen doesn't feel like praise, it feels like exposure. Like you have to prepare for the moment it's taken away again. That afternoon, a letter arrived. Not an email. Not a press request. A real letter stamped, hand-addressed, folded neatly in thirds. It was from a 14-year-old girl named Betrayal, from Rochester. Her handwriting was careful, the loops of her G's just slightly exaggerated. Dear Ms. Madsen, my teacher told us to research a woman in STEM who changed the way people think. I picked you because my brother is alive today thanks to your system keeping the NICU powered during a blackout last year. I didn't know your name before, but I'll never forget it now. I want to build systems like your own that help people, even if no one sees it. Also, your code is really clean. I'm trying to reverse engineer it for practice. Hope that's okay. Love. Betrayal, future engineer, hopefully. I didn't cry when the IPO collapsed. I didn't cry when Evan stammered through his press conference. But I cried reading that letter. Because recognition doesn't always come in headlines or lawsuits. Sometimes, it arrives in a folded piece of paper, with a crooked heart drawn in purple pen. I pinned the letter above my desk. Not to remind myself what I did, but to remind myself why I did it. And just before I shut down my laptop for the night, I opened the system dashboard one more time. 35 licenses. Active. Solenta, revoked. One new request, pending Rural Tech Initiative, Kansas. Attached to the application was a single comment. We don't want to just use your work, we want to honor it. Please, advise terms. I clicked accept. No negotiation. No grand reveal. Just a quiet yes. Because finally, after all the silence, the erasure, the false narratives, I was being credited not as a risk, not as a cost, but as a creator. And that was enough. No ribbon cutting. No press. No podium. Just a small, brushed metal plaque beside a glass door, barely bigger than my palm. It read, "Built to be shared, not sold." That was all. The building itself wasn't grand, an old warehouse in the South Loop of Chicago, once used for textile storage, then left abandoned for years. I'd passed it a dozen times, never imagining it would one day house something like this. Now, it was alive. Inside, rows of modular workstations, solar panels on the roof, a shared server lab that hummed with low, steady warmth. No assigned desks. No executive floor. No walls with framed photos of founders. Just code. Ideas. People. The Framework Collective wasn't a company. It wasn't even an organization in the traditional sense. It was a space for builders who had been overlooked. For interns who fixed what others broke. For inventors who never got invited to the meetings but quietly saved the system. Every project was open source. Every contributor's named developer, janitor, delivery driver, was credited equally in the documentation. No patents under personal names. No gatekeeping. Just architecture with accountability. And it worked. On the far side of the main hall, a glowing glass installation stood along the wall. The Wall of Trace. Not names in marble, but a rolling grid of LED text line by line, contributor by contributor. People who'd helped keep systems running. People whose names had once been buried in footnotes or not listed at all. Some stayed lit. Some faded gently, replaced by others in a soft, respectful cycle. No one stayed at the top. Because that wasn't the point. One afternoon, I stood watching a group of high school students huddled over a prototype grid relay, laughing, soldering, failing, trying again. One of them, a tall girl in a denim jacket, turned to me and said, "You work here?" I nodded. "What do you do?" she asked. I smiled. "I just keep the lights on." She grinned and turned back to her circuit. They didn't know my name. They didn't need to. Because legacy isn't about being remembered by everyone. It's about being remembered by the right ones. Later that evening, I sat in my office's small glass space tucked in the corner. Nothing fancy. Just a desk, a lamp, a plant that somehow hadn't died. A new message pinged into my inbox. Sender: Brielle.d@midwestacademy.org. Subject: Update, ***. Miss Matson, I just submitted my early decision application to MIT. I wrote my essay about you. Not just the shutdown or the code, but about how you stayed. How you chose to build something better instead of walking away. I want to do that too. Thank you. Brielle. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I typed a reply. You already are. I closed the laptop. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. Inside, the wall of trace kept moving quietly, steadily, just like the work we do. Work that outlives us. Because some people build companies. Others build conditions where better things can be built. And for the first time, I wasn't just holding the foundation. I was becoming it.